tell me what your assignment was with the KGB? And I believe you stated before that you didn't know the full assignment when you went in.
That is correct. They never shared with me what the most important thing of my being in the United States was. And I found that out based on interviews that were given after the KGB was dissolved by two individuals who were at one point in charge of the Directorate S illegals. And they stated quite clearly the most important thing for us illegals being in the United States was us being in the United States. And in hindsight, I put two and two together. Towards the end of the Cold War, there were spy wars going on between the CIA and the KGB. And other than us illegals, all the spies were diplomats. And when they caught a diplomat doing something that smells like espionage, we, the United States, would kick out a KGB spy. And then they would retaliate. And it went back and forth, maybe a whole team of spies. And then the retaliation was the same number. And in that time, there were two moles in U.S. espionage organizations. There's Aldrich Ames, who was in the CIA, and he was involved in planning anti-Soviet activities. Did a lot of damage because he was an extremely valuable agent for the KGB. And the other one was Robert Hansen. He was in the FBI, and he also did anti-Soviet stuff. They were by far the most valuable agents that the KGB had in NATO countries. God forbid, and Andropov was worried about diplomatic relations being broken up altogether. And who would have been left over to work with those valuable agents, the moles, us illegals? I was never prepared. I was never told what I just shared with you. I don't know why. Pretty stupid. They very often kept things from me that would have helped me make better decisions, because I could never ask somebody, is that the right thing to do? So
you weren't installed in a position here in the U.S. government. You were domestic.
Not at all.
So did they enter? Do you know if they entered the country the same way you did? Like, did they have the same start as you, or were they like, you're going to go and immediately have this position?
I don't know, because they were all together, and that was information that came out of KGB archives. In the the latter period of the Cold War, the KGB trained 8 of us. It is not clear how many actually were launched, and it's not clear how many actually had to abort the mission. I am friends with a colleague of mine, also a German. He and his wife were the original Americans, because they came to the U.S. as a couple. And their only task was, and they were told, the only task was to just live as Americans. And also, with regard to sending illegals over, the majority of us illegals came through a second country. Remember in 2010, you may remember that, or you may have heard of it, the FBI arrested four married couples that were illegals. They all came either through Canada or Brazil. So countries where it was easier to gain citizenship using forged documents, and then they would immigrate legally, but still were illegal in this country. I was an exception to the moment that, because of my ability to speak American English with just a touch of an accent, the moment I set foot on this country, I pretended to have been born in New Jersey, because Jack Barsky, whose identity we stole, was born in New Jersey. He passed away at the age of 11, and the KGB was able to get an notarized, an authentic copy of his birth certificate. One other thing with regard to the task, I was tasked with one thing that was important to them: get to know as many people as possible and operate as a spotter, suggest which ones either have access to secrets or could eventually have access to secrets. Particularly, I was, and then profile them and give name and address and how they could be approached. I have no idea whether they were able to successfully recruit any one of those because they didn't share that with me either.
But you did find people that
Oh
fit
yeah,
their.
particularly when I went to college here. You know, in 1986, the last time I visited Moscow, I was approached by somebody who was involved in industrial espionage, and he asked me to get if I can get my hands on either hardware or software that is on the do not export list that they wanted me to steal, so to speak. Maybe buy. And I stole one piece of software that was very, very popular in American corporations in those days. But I doubt that it was useful because it was used by corporations to operate in a capitalist system, and it wouldn't have worked in a communist system.
Oh.
So I'm very glad that this couldn't have done any damage.
So while you were on assignment here, how did you ingrain yourself in local communities? Did you have friends, and how did you compartmentalize who you were?
Yeah, the first few years I was very careful to get close socially with others because I was well aware that I wasn't Americanized. I spoke English as well as I speak it now. I had learned a lot of stuff about the United States, who the Yankees were, and and the football teams, and I watched a lot of TV, and I was up to date with culture and television, but I had no history, and I didn't know how to behave like an American, and I found that out quickly just by observing. So my first 3 years, I didn't even date somebody. I was afraid of women to be more in tuned in the fact that I didn't actually appear to be real. Okay. Now the accent was okay. In New York, everybody has an accent, so that wasn't a big problem. But I lucked out in a sense that my first job, I worked as a bike messenger, and in between routes, I waited in the office. There was an office where we hung out before we were sent out to either pick up or deliver, and I just listened to the other bike messengers. Uh, and it was very safe for me because these were all like transients. They typically had a job maybe for 6 months and then they went on to something else. They weren't curious about me because I was just able to listen, and that convinced me that I had a lot to learn. Uh,
That's an
there's one
interesting
thing
point
that,
you make, is that you noticed Americans weren't really interested in you.
yeah, those Americans weren't interested in me. Uh, when I mingled with people that were, such as when I started college, I was able to handle myself. There was some things I still was not aware of, and this is the one thing that I only found out lately. There's a movie called Inglorious Bastards. If you're familiar with that movie, where's a scene where somebody an American impersonates a German, and he counts on his fingers, and he starts counting like this one, and I can't really do that. We start counting with the thumb. So I still had vulnerabilities, but when I was in college, particularly, I went to City University. Probably half my fellow students were from another country. It was like the United Nations. And then when I started my job as a programmer in a large company, I felt very certain that I would pass. Even that was not 100%. And I give you this one example that was an eye opener. So I had a good friend there who was a Cuban immigrant, and immigrant. He he was a really smart guy, and we became good friends because we complemented each other. He had the ideas, and I was very good at implementing them. And one day, he took me into a conference room, and he said, Jack, I really love you, and it's great working with you. But I got to tell you, everybody in this office thinks you're an asshole. I said, huh? And then he boiled it down to my communication style. Germans are very direct, very critical. And the part of Germany where I grew up also was very negative. So I would tell people, well, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing this, without them asking me and not being diplomatic enough. So uh, I I figured this out. He opened my eyes, and I don't communicate like a German anymore unless I'm very passionate. But I make sure that I do not offend anybody, because that's meaningless. It actually diminishes the opinion that you may have, even if it's a strong opinion. So yeah, it took a long time, and now the Germans think I'm a little bit off, and I take pride in that.
So there was never, or was there ever a point where the version of you that you had, that, like who you really were, did that come into conflict with who you had to pretend to be?
Good question. No, I was highly compartmentalized, and I can tell you that I had proof of that even while I was compartmentalized. I'm not anymore, because I was able to reconcile both the German and the American. But every 2 years, four times during my 10 years, the Jack Barsky went back to Germany and had contact with his German family. And then, when I was in Germany, I instinctively reacted to when somebody behind me called me by my German name. I was back to the German self. And the moment I came back to the United States, I was home again. And there's one time, it was only after my second visit. So I was in the U.S. for 4 years. The moment I had a chance, I came back in the fall. It was the World Series, and I was eager to find out how the Yankees were doing. The German wouldn't have worried about that. It was, and the compartmentalization still has an after effect. If somebody were to walk in here and said something in German, my English would be blocked.
Oh,
And
interesting. So they
yeah,
cancel each other out.
I can't translate very well, because apparently the connection of the neurons that have stored German, and the neurons that are stored English have stored English, is very weak. So I could not write my book. It was translated in German. I had to use a translator. And one thing was real funny. Um, I had come off of a talk on the internet with a German fellow, and my son calls me, and I start talking to him in German. I wasn't aware of it. And he kept on yelling, Jack! And no, Dad. He said, Dad. And I kept on saying, was ist los? Was hast du denn? And I mean, what's going on? Eventually he said, you're speaking German. So compartmentalization, that's the only way you survive that kind of a situation. When to credibly impersonate another person. And so, this is like how uh, sociopaths and psychopaths operate. And I'm not proud to have been in that company. Uh, I did not I did not use that compartmentalization to purposely damage other people. I know that I did damage to my family. I may have done other damage, but I'm not aware of that. I didn't do it purposely, and the one time I did do it on purpose, was because I thought I was serving a very noble cause. It's not an excuse; it's an explanation.